Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have our second learning session about everything you need to know about grad school. We are so excited to have three different speakers who are current graduate students at UHN who will be sharing their experiences with you and will be answering any of the burning questions that you have about grad school. I also did grad school many years ago, so I am happy to share my experiences with you as well. And I hope you'll find it useful as you try to sort out if you're enjoying research this summer and if you want to continue into grad school or what other career options you have. Just as a reminder, here are the learning sessions that we have going on for the summer student program. So we've also already had a session on what you can do with your science degree. We will have a session collaborating with Baycrest on LinkedIn and resumes. We'll have a session on July 7th about how to present your research. And of course, you'll all have an opportunity at the end of the summer on July 21st to share your research with the UHN community. So our sessions are always open to anybody, but for UHN research summer students, as well as volunteers, you are all welcome to receive a certificate of completion if you attend a certain number of these workshops, as well as share your research on Research Day. Now, many of you may have already started later and weren't able to attend the first session, or may have to skip a session in the future. That's totally fine. We have recordings for all of the sessions. If you want to get your certificate of completion, you're not able to attend 3 of them, which is what we're suggesting, please reach out to me. We have an alternate way you can view the recordings and then prove that you watched it, and you can get credit as well. So we want to make sure as many people as possible can leverage this program and be able to put it on their resumes after. So first, before we present our panelists, we first want to give a land acknowledgement. So I didn't introduce myself yet, but my name is Amanda Berry, and I am the lead of the Office of Research Trainees, and I'm a member of the UHN Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee. I am of Italian descent, born and raised and living in the unceded territory in Canada. Now, these land acknowledgements are really important, and when I reflect on my experience with the land and why I find I'd like to acknowledge the land, I see myself as a child of immigrants. I'm so grateful for the fact that my grandparents and my dad were able to immigrate to Canada and provide me the opportunities that I've had. I wouldn't have been able to go to grad school without all of the sacrifices that they've made, and I wouldn't be able to have this career and all the experiences in my life. So I'm grateful to all the opportunities that Canada has given us and has given our family. To acknowledge the land that UHN operates on, there has been a UHN hospital on this land since 1829. Long before that, Indigenous peoples were its stewards. They, as their descendants, and we at UHN do now, learned, shared knowledge, and healed each other. Regardless of where we sit today, we owe much to the peoples that have called this land home. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work here. We remember and honor the legacy of the people who have been here before us and all who work to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real. I would like to take a moment to invite you to reflect the land that you are currently on. We also have some resources linked here. So if you scan the QR code, you can see a bunch of resources on land acknowledgements in the territory that you're on, as well as if you'd like to receive your own land information, you can text your city and province to the number here. Thank you. So just a couple quick tips before we get started. If you would like to receive that certificate of completion that I was telling you about before, you'll have to fill out an attendance form, and we'll be sharing that in the middle of the session. So make sure you do that. If you can, please change your Zoom name to your first name and then your last name. This again will just be a double mechanism for us to check your attendance. We will be recording this session, and it will be made available. For certain presentations, the slides will also be made available if you'd like. Please add any of your questions for the panelists to the chat. And just we really hope that you can keep this a safe space and be respectful, so that we can really acknowledge everybody's different experiences and have a safe place for all of us to learn together. So with that, I am excited to introduce our fantastic panelists. So we have, as I mentioned before, we have 3 graduate students here that are all working in different departments and different areas at UHN. They all come from different grad programs. So I will get started first. We have Forum Bias, who is going to share with you her experiences. Thanks, Forum.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Everyone can hear me, everyone can see me. All good, everyone can see the slides, right? Okay, awesome. So today I'll be, I guess, discussing the big question for me, which was to PhD or not to PhD, which is essentially how and why I made my decision to get into grad school and the degree that I want to pursue right now. Oops, sorry. So this is me, and I wanted to kind of really introduce you to my journey to grad school first. So I actually did my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I did my honors Bachelor of Science, double majoring in immunology and cell molecular biology. And when I joined U of T, I actually didn't really know if I wanted to do research. I don't think I actually knew an idea of, or I had an idea of what research really meant until I joined the Immunology Students Association, which is essentially just like a student association for the immunology undergrads at U of T. And I made so many friends that had a very diverse range of interests. So we had people in IMSA that were doing immunology, but then also maybe even French or neuroscience, et cetera. Like it was a really wide range. And so the research interests also differed. And I really got interested in doing research because of how passionate they were when they were sharing their research with me. And so I was like, maybe I kind of want to give this a try. And so at the end of my second year and before my third, in that summer, I joined a lab at Princess Margaret doing pancreatic cancer research. I loved it so much that I ended up doing 2 thesis projects in my undergrad degree. One was a 4th year thesis project that I actually did in my 3rd year, and then a second 4th year thesis project that I did in my 4th year. And they're just called 4th year thesis projects because of the course codes. But yeah, so I knew that at this point, I really love research, and I want to make sure that I do it after, because that's all I knew I wanted to do, is I wanted to keep doing research. And so when I was in the early stage, or like the early couple of months of 4th year, I had to think about where I wanted to go after. And the courses or the programs I was looking into, kind of both fell into either being thesis-based or course-based. And so the real question for me was, which one do I like more? Which one is more suited to my needs? So I'm going to share with you a few considerations for both of them, for each of them, that helped me make my decision. So to start off with the thesis-based master's, sorry, my arrows aren't working. The thesis-based programs usually have a longer program duration because they're not really required on semesters or credits. It's really, how much have you done? Is it enough to write a thesis? And can you defend that thesis? Like, do you have enough material? And so it's really a ballpark. Like you might be doing a master's, which is between 2 to 3 years, or one that might be between like 1 to 2 years. It really depends. I was making a note of like the independence that you would get in your scientific thinking, and the networks you would be able to build through that, because while you do have guidance from your PI, over time you become more and more independent in the way that you approach your topic and your results. You get a stipend, which covers your tuition for most programs, but also provides you with some livable allowance. So you're not fully paying out of pocket. There's also less coursework involved because you're spending a lot more of your time on independent research work. And there's also the opportunity to learn project management skills, because that's what you're doing. You're learning how to manage your own project, your own collaborations. You're trying to figure out your deadlines and make sure you're staying on track. And my favorite part about this was that I love Excel spreadsheets, and that would let me do that. And there's also TA opportunities in undergrad courses for some programs. And so with that, the course-based programs actually have similar overlapping criteria, I guess, or considerations, but also some are different. So it is shorter because you are usually limited by semesters that you have to complete or particular number of credits. You can also subspecialize. For example, at Mishra, you can do cardiac perfusion, and so you'll have courses that are required for that in particular. It does give you a lot more structure because it is, in a way, structured like undergrad. So you would have your classes, you would have your tutorials, your labs, and whereas in thesis, you're primarily just, a lot of times there's no schedule to your day. But in course-based programs, you actually get a lot of professional development when you take those internships or placements or hands-on work opportunities available to you from your program. And that helps you build your network about what you might want to do right after you finish your program. And again, because some of them do have undergrad programs, you can get TA opportunities there as well. So I ended up choosing a thesis-based program because of three primary considerations. I wanted that independence and scientific thinking. I don't want to do a lot of coursework, I'll be honest. And I did want to do project management. I wanted to build those skills and continue to enhance those skills. And so that's where I chose my grad program in particular. After which, like, figuring out which program what kind of program I wanted to do was great. But now I needed to figure out what kind of project would I want to do. And that really does matter because a lot of departments kind of have a heavy focus on on particular concepts, particular fields. So how did I pick that? Well, like I mentioned, I did a lot of research opportunities. I had a lot of research opportunities throughout my undergrad where I did my thesis projects, my summer studentships, and I realized I like pancreatic cancer research, which is where I was primarily working. And I got the opportunity to do some dry lab stuff with a bit of like bioimage analysis, but I really liked the wet lab techniques I was learning. But at the end of the day, I also wanted to continue to expand my abilities, my techniques. And so I took a introduction to coding course in my fourth year, or right before my fourth year, because I couldn't fit into my schedule. And I learned Python, very introductory level Python, but I loved it and I thought it was so much fun. And I wanted to figure out, is there a way that I can merge the two together? And luckily there is, and there was. And so I actually chose to go to the Department of Medical Biophysics and the Faculty of Medicine here at U of T, where I'm currently a master's candidate. I have one supervisor that focuses primarily on wet lab and another supervisor that primarily focuses on dry lab activities. And so I actually get the best of both worlds. My project is a good mix of wet lab and dry lab. And I also had the opportunity to continue building my coding skills, but also my wet lab technical repertoire. So with that, like, this is kind of the big question for me, or was the big question for me the last couple of months, which was, do I want to do a PhD or not? And also, if I do, when do I want to do it? So where I stand right now is I'm a year and a half into my master's. I like to say that I've made great progress and I have some cool ideas I'd like to pursue. And at the end of my master's, I could pursue my PhD elsewhere. So I could go international and have new opportunities, expand my networks even further, and maybe even research different topics in cancer. And if I don't want to do a PhD, then I can just start working earlier, which is also a really, really tempting concept. But if I move to a PhD now, I can pursue the ideas that I have even further. Because I've already done so much in my master's, it would be a shorter PhD, which is always tempting. I don't have to finish a master's in the next year and a half and then go and start a PhD elsewhere, which would be another 5-6 years. Because I do have the existing knowledge for my field and my project, I can just keep building on that even further. And with the independence that I'm gaining over time, I open myself to more and more collaborations. The only caveat is, while I can't work yet entirely, it also still opens doors to some more high-level jobs in the future when I am done, which is also very tempting. And so what did I end up choosing? Well, I kind of chose a PhD. So I'm actually currently preparing for a reclass exam, which is also a transfer exam, where I'm essentially switching from a master's to a PhD, and it's happening in August. But yeah, so that's where I am. But one of the reasons that I actually chose to stay here to do my PhD is because of the support I got from my supervisors. And so I kind of want to take a step into the mental health sphere a little bit because it's actually very, very important. Grad school is a bit challenging. And with that comes a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of stress, and other mental health struggles. And so a bit of background about my own struggles and what I've learned from this experience that I want to share with you is that when the pandemic happened in 2020, I was in my fourth year. It was like March. I was graduating in like a month. And there was complete loss of structure, and that was not great. But I also started my master's in the middle of a pandemic. And with that, I really struggled because I was now having trouble with reading comprehension, with focus, with paying attention, understanding what people were speaking or saying, really. And I actually ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year. And it's still very challenging for me. But what's made it really what's made it easier for me is actually the supportive supervisors that I do have, who have even pre and post diagnosis followed up consistently, listened to my concerns. And while they might not have implemented these actions for my situation in particular, they do now have very strong considerations for mental health breaks if you need them, or bio breaks in meetings, because I can't sit for too long, but other people might also be getting Zoom tired. And so that's one of the primary reasons why I wanted to stay here for my PhD. And what did I learn in the last 2 years of a lot of, I think, struggles is that I have to take more breaks and I need to be more gentle with myself. Grad school is a lot of work, and it's okay to take a break and rest. I spent more time with my friends and my family, and I learned to reprioritize my list of important items. I worked out and I slept more, and I actually got the rest that I needed to build a routine. Because for me, when you're doing a thesis-based master's, you don't necessarily have as much structure as you might be used to. So for me, I had to build that structure myself. And at the end of the day, I have two important things I want to make sure you take away from this. That work-life balance is essential. And so you need to find a grad program or whatever future direction you go towards that is conducive to what your work-life balance idea looks like. And also, you have to advocate for yourself no matter where you go. Grad school is challenging, and if you're struggling, reach out for help. There's nothing wrong with that. And when you're struggling, it's important to remember that you're not struggling because it's easy. You're struggling because it is hard and it is challenging. But yeah, so like that's what I ended up taking, I guess, away from the last year and a half of my master's. And with where I am now, which is preparing for my transfer exam, taking care of myself, where am I going to go with it? So here's a really, really brief spiel on my future professional / academic plans. I want to pass my transfer exam, become a PhD candidate, do my research, get my PhD, and then I have no idea. And the best part about grad school to me is that you don't really need to know. It's not a professional degree. You didn't lock yourself into a particular field potentially or job. The world is your oyster, really. So, for example, I might go continue research as a postdoc, maybe in academia, maybe in industry. I might go into the teaching stream, become a professor or a lecturer. Or something else that's really interesting to me is consulting for biotech or pharma. Maybe that's something that's really interesting to me. But I still don't know, and I'm okay with that. But yes, so with all of this, I really want to thank you for your attention and the opportunity to speak on this. Stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Forum, for sharing your experiences. I think a lot of us in grad school can all attest to the fact that grad school is definitely hard, but that there's ways to survive it. And I think it's important to recognize both, if you're considering grad school, that it can be hard, but that it doesn't have to be an insurmountable goal. So I love that message. So I just wanted to take a quick break before we introduce the next speaker and introduce a poll. Maybe you've been to my sessions know I like interactive activities. I put the link in the chat for how you can participate. So just let us know. We want to get to know you. So you're learning about us and we'd love to get to know you. So tell us which position you're in right now. Amazing. So we're seeing a lot of third or higher undergrads, which is great because this is a time that you might really be thinking about grad school. My next question for you is, ooh, it's going to let me transition. Hold on. There's always some kind of technical glitch. Okay. The next question is, we want to know, as we're talking about grad school today, are you interested in pursuing grad school? And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but let us know. We also know that there's different kinds of grad programs. There's research and course-based. So just love to hear what you're thinking. So we're seeing a good mix. Lots of people don't know, which is totally okay. And lots of people are considering it, which is cool. And I apologize, I have the free account, so we are no longer taking your responses. So I have one more question that we'll be asking you later on in the session. But in the meantime, I want to thank Forum again for your experiences. And next, I want to introduce you to another fantastic graduate student, Noor El-Kafi.
Hi, everyone. Just going to share my screen here. Okay. Y'all see my slides? Great. So it's so nice to see so many of you. I saw from the poll that a lot of you are third year or higher undergrads, which is good to know. And there's some grad students as well. So I'll kind of spend some time talking about my journey to grad school and some other tips and tricks that I have with picking a research area, as well as picking out a supervisor, and how I think both of those sort of shape your graduate school experience. So just a little bit about me. I'm a first-year master's student at the Institute of Medical Sciences, which is a program at the University of Toronto, and I'm mostly doing clinical research. So this is kind of a very brief timeline of everything that sort of led up to graduate school. I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I did a double major in biology for health sciences and psychology. And I really enjoyed that. I liked the courses that I took. I liked the courses that I was exposed to. And I did a lot of research during my undergrad too, in a few different areas. So I actually initially started out doing a research project in the psychology department, where I was working with refugees on their mental health experiences post-migration. And I really liked the research side of things, but I wanted to get exposed to something that's a little bit more clinical. So I ended up kind of pursuing a clinical research assistant job at the University Health Network. And I kind of mostly work with transplant recipients. So I work with lung, kidney, heart, kidney, pancreas transplant recipients. And a lot of that work was kind of focused on understanding quality of life, symptom management, symptom experiences, as well as just kind of like how to improve their overall care. And I really did enjoy that kind of work, and I wanted to do something like that in the future. I just wasn't sure if this was the area that I was going to stick to. I know a lot of you are also in third and fourth year, and you might be pursuing thesis projects pretty soon. I kind of pursued something that's very similar to a thesis project. It was called a capstone project. So it's not your typical thesis course where you do a project on your own and you kind of write up your thesis. It was sort of a group project, and we developed this capstone idea that was essentially going to be implemented after the course was over. And it was focused on respiratory health in older adults. So again, it kind of also incorporated a lot of elements of quality of life and improving chronic conditions, improving care for chronic conditions. So as you can kind of see, there's a few common themes that I have coming in from my undergrad experience. And I think it's really important as you are, as you reach kind of third and fourth year, you look at your previous experiences and you try to understand what sort of themes pop out from your previous experiences and whether or not you've been missing some themes. And are there any other topics that you essentially want to get exposed to that you haven't gotten exposed to yet? That's really important. And I did that all throughout undergrad. I was very conscious of what kinds of topics I was pursuing. And then I also added this extracurricular over here where I was basically a show host at this podcast that was run by a graduate student at the Institute of Medical Sciences. I did put that in because I actually wrote about that in my personal statement when I applied to IMS. And I think it played a huge role in why I chose that particular program. I really like the people that I worked with at that podcast.
and I liked the type of research that they were doing as well. They were all doing very different kinds of research. So that just kind of goes to show that you can get involved in your department's extracurriculars before you even start grad school. And it might even help you with your application and see if you really like the people that are basically working at your department. The other kind of important experience that I wanted to highlight was I actually participated in IMS SERP, which is the Summer Undergraduate Research Program. Some of you might be participating in that currently, but the way that I kind of went about that was, it was right after, it was the summer of my third year, I think. And I started thinking about grad school, but I wasn't sure what kind of topic I wanted to pursue. And so again, I kind of took this thematic approach where I looked at all of my experiences and I wrote down keywords of what topics I was exposed to, and that included the methods that I was exposed to as well. And then I kind of narrowed it down to, well, I was kind of exposed to a lot of chronic care conditions, a lot of like respiratory conditions. I worked a lot with the lung transplant group, but then I was also kind of exposed to working in the more geriatrics field with older adults. And I wasn't sure exactly which direction I wanted to take. And that's completely fine. You don't have to be very sold on one particular topic. But what I wanted to do is just kind of do a research project that was a little bit more geriatrics focused and see if I like that area, if not, and if I wanted to basically pursue my master's in that topic or not. And I did end up doing that project for 3 months over the summer. I did like it, but it just didn't have that spark that I was looking for. So it was really good that I did do that project. I did get an abstract out of it. And another master's student has actually picked it up, and it's basically her thesis now. And my name would go on any of the publications that she would be working on as well. So that's pretty good. But I did kind of realize that I was more interested in the respiratory sides of things. So that's kind of what I'm currently pursuing in my graduate studies. So this is kind of a summary of the research area that I'm focused on. I'm looking at respiratory health, quality of life, and physical activity in people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility spectrum disorders, which sounds like a mouthful. But this project really, I did really think a lot about what kind of project that I wanted to pursue. And the way that I kind of thought about it was, okay, now I know that I have this particular area that I like, which is respiratory health. That's a very broad area, so we need to narrow that down. I thought about the kinds of scope that I wanted to work on. So do I want to look at it in a more population level type of scope, or did I want to focus more on a clinical setting? Do I want to look at quality of life, physical activity? What aspects of their health do I want to look at? So I kind of narrowed it down to quality of life and physical activity. And then I also thought about the kinds of methods that I'm using. So I was kind of exposed to both quantitative and qualitative methods in undergrad. So that means I did a lot of statistics, so a lot of data analysis from questionnaires, from other forms of, from cardiopulmonary testing, things like that. But I also really enjoyed doing interviews with patients and caregivers and healthcare providers, which is kind of more qualitative. So I wanted something that kind of incorporated both quantitative and qualitative methods. And that's exactly what I got out of this project. So I'm using Fitbits, I'm using interviews, I'm using questionnaires, and I'm also using cardiopulmonary testing as well. And that's something that I discussed with my supervisor early on. He kind of knew that I was very keen on qualitative methods and I wanted to incorporate that, even though it wasn't his area of expertise. But he did kind of let me incorporate some of the methods that I was interested in as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that you don't have to take on, you can kind of negotiate with your supervisor essentially about the project that you want to pursue. Which kind of brings me to some tips and tricks or some questions that I sort of asked myself when I was picking out a clinical research area in my supervisor. I do think these things go hand in hand. First of all, some programs will ask you to pick out a supervisor before you are accepted to the program. Some programs will essentially give you some time. They'll say you can get a supervisor before, or you can basically secure one at the end of your first year. And then some programs allow you to do rotations in different departments for you to be able to see what supervisors or labs you want to work in, and then you pick based on that. So at IMS, it's the second approach, which is you can secure a supervisor before you're accepted, but it's not a requirement. You can choose one afterwards, although a lot of people choose one before because it does kind of give you a lot more time to start your project early on. And then you basically don't have to kind of scramble. A lot of supervisors pick their students before they're accepted to the program. And there's usually kind of a really big list of the supervisor's names, the projects that they're offering, and their contact information. And you would basically just kind of send out cold emails. So some factors that I really considered here was the biggest thing for me was the mentorship style of the supervisor. So I really liked having someone to check in with me constantly. Some people really like to kind of do their own thing, do their own work, and then basically go to the supervisor whenever they have questions or check in with them every once in a while. Whereas the kind of mentorship style that I was more comfortable with was I like to have contact with someone basically every day, or at least meet once a week or once every 2 weeks. I think that kind of helps me move forward with my work. So that was something I was looking for in a supervisor. The other consideration was I had worked with bigger research teams before, and I think there's lots of advantages to that. You get to be exposed to a lot of research projects, and you get to work with a lot of students. But for my master's, I kind of wanted a smaller team of people because I knew that it was a very short amount of time. I wanted to get my projects done on time. And working with a smaller team was just easier in terms of getting to know everyone and not feeling like you can get lost in the team. So that was another thing that I was looking for. And then also a big misconception is that when you start your master's, you only work on your thesis and nothing else. I actually work on my thesis. That's my main work. That's my main responsibility. But then there's also other research projects that I'm working on that complement my thesis work. And they're just kind of to get my names on publications, to get exposed to different methods, to get exposed to different opportunities. So that's something that's important to consider, is like, what kind of affiliations does the supervisor have? What groups are they a part of? What other opportunities could they potentially give you? And then in terms of the research area, again, I kind of went with that thematic approach. Write down the themes that you're interested in. And then the next slide, I'll show you kind of how I put together a few themes. And then think about what kinds of experiences you want and what you have and what you maybe don't like. I knew that I wanted to start somewhere familiar. So I was familiar with quality of life research. I was familiar with working with more on the respiratory sides of things, but I did want some exposure to physical functioning. I wanted some exposure to some more physical assessments as well, not just questionnaires and interviews. And then I also knew that I was open to working with any patient population, essentially. So I kind of got a mix of a project where I was familiar with some aspects, but a lot of them were new. And I really liked that. I didn't want my master's to be a continuation of my undergrad work. And yeah, just kind of consider the methods that you're interested in: quantitative, qualitative, coding. Do you want to do wet lab techniques? Obviously with clinical, I'm doing I work a lot at the hospital. I work with patients. I do a lot of recruitment. So those types of techniques are a bit different. And then the scope is important. Do you want to work at more of like a public health level type of thing? Or do you want to work with a smaller clinic? Or do you want to, what aspects of health do you want to address, and at what scope? How broad or narrow do you want to address them at? That's pretty important to consider. And so this is just kind of a sample template that I had prepared when I was thinking about what kinds of programs I wanted to apply to and what kinds of supervisors I wanted to reach out to. I think I switched the status and type columns, but just to draw your attention to the first row over here, as you can see, this supervisor, they're part of the lab medicine and pathobiology program, and they're part of the Institute of Medical Sciences. And so sometimes you can find that some supervisors have affiliations with more than one program, and you can be accepted to either one of these programs and still work on the same project. So that's something you might want to consider when you're applying to graduate programs. If there's a particular supervisor you're keen on, and you know that they're affiliated with both of these programs, it's something that you can mention. If you're applying to both of these, you can be like, well, I'm applying to both of these programs. If I get accepted to either of them, I'd be happy to pursue a master's or a PhD with you, essentially. So it's something I didn't know about that you might want to consider when you're planning out your supervisor outreach. And so this is kind of, I put together the circle to kind of show you that there is more than one aspect to graduate school that's not just kind of research focused. So of course you have your main thesis. Some people will do one project throughout their 2 years. Some people will do one project for their first year of their master's and another project that's related in their second year of their master's. So the structure is very, very variable. Like all of the people at my program, they all have such different experiences and very different fields that they're working in. And it all depends on what you work out with the supervisor that you want. Another consideration is that a lot of people at my program end up pursuing professional degrees afterwards. So dentistry, pharmacy, medicine, or they go into academia or consulting or teaching. But a lot of them pursue professional programs. So, and I think some of you might know this, if you're pursuing a professional program, you might be involved in other extracurriculars like student leadership, community leadership. So you do have time to do all of these things in a research-based master's because the schedule is a lot more flexible. And especially if you discuss that with your supervisor early on, that's why I kind of have career support under the supervisor lab environment. I told my supervisor I'm really interested in pursuing a professional program after my master's, and he knows that. He knows that there's times where I'm working on only research, but he knows about my other extracurricular involvements as well, and he's pretty supportive of those too. So I think that's important to discuss. Also in terms of timelines, because I think if you're applying to those programs, you do need to graduate from your degree within a particular timeline as well. So it's good to discuss with your supervisor early on if you're pursuing professional degrees afterwards. And then even if you're not pursuing professional degrees afterwards, and maybe you're not sure if you want to stick in the research field, you can kind of use the time where you're not working on your thesis to do things that are of other professional interests. So for example, for me, I'm really interested in science communication and science journalism. So I submit a lot of stories for magazines. I do some podcasting. I attend a lot of events where I talk about science communication. That's something I'm also considering for my career in the long term that I want to pursue. So that's the nice thing about a master's is you can really have the schedule that you want based on what you want to pursue afterwards. Another important consideration is that if you are applying to professional schools or if you are applying to jobs where you kind of want some publications on your CV, a lot of people won't publish their master's thesis until after they graduate. So it's a good thing if you want to get your hands on some publications, you can discuss that with your supervisor where you essentially contribute to other projects that maybe some other students are working on. It could be writing a couple paragraphs for a paper. It could be helping with data analysis or data extraction. It could be being a second reviewer, but you essentially get your names on these other projects and you can put those on your CV as well. And it's good experience for you to get exposure to a few different areas as well. And this is just a slide to show that, again, you don't have to do research 100% of your time. There's definitely days where I'm like literally just writing up a paper from the morning till night. And then there's other days where I'm doing other extracurriculars that have nothing to do with research. And that kind of helps me feel a little bit more balanced, where I kind of, I get a break from research in a sense for a couple of days and then I come back to it, but I'm constantly making sure that I reach those deadlines and I'm getting things done. But if you're the kind of person who has lots of different interests, you can definitely pursue them in grad school, again, because of that flexible schedule. That's pretty much it. I guess we'll answer questions at the end of all of our presentations. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nora, for sharing your experiences with us. I think I resonated a lot with a lot of the things that you said. I'd also say when I was planning to find my supervisor for grad school, I also cared about having that interaction and that mentorship and thinking about how they will help you get your future job or help you be a mentor to you. And finding good mentors is so important, and finding a good supervisor can help you do that, which is great. So put the poll in the chat. Just wanted to get a feel from you now that we've chatted a bit more. Do you know what you want to do after you graduate or you finish your current position? I see a lot of you don't know, and that is totally okay. I definitely didn't know what I wanted to do with my life until I finished my PhD. So there's lots and lots of time to figure that out. We do see some people are interested in med school, which is amazing. There are lots of other professional schools that you can think about as well. And we talked about some of them and some of the other healthcare options in our first session. We can definitely share that recording with everyone. Awesome. Yeah, it's very important to think about whether you want to do grad school right away or if you want to take a few years off first. Different options for professional schools and grad school, which is fantastic. Pharmacy, clinical research and industry, fantastic. Lots of people do grad school and then go to industry, which is a really popular path. So great. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll stop that here and introduce our next speaker. So we're very excited to have another graduate student with us, Jennifer Kita, who is going to share their experiences as well.
Hello. I just want to make sure you can see my screen and everyone can hear me. Great. Let me get started. So I love GIFs, so I put quite a few GIFs in this. So hello, I'm Jen, and I'm a first-year PhD student at U of T in biomedical engineering. So I'm going to give you the wet bench and kind of engineering side of things here, a little bit away from science. If you're in engineering, let us know in the chat. I'd love to see there's fellow undergrad engineers here. And so yeah, so I'm associated with technically Toronto General Hospital at UHN, and I was once an undergrad researcher just like most of you, so I'm super excited to share with you kind of like what I've accomplished since being an undergrad, and kind of hopefully answer any questions that you guys might have. Yeah, so I want to start off. So I did my undergrad in biomedical engineering. I decided I want to stay in Toronto for my undergrad, so I ended up going to Ryerson. And so during my time in undergrad, I kind of started just after first year, I started at Humber River Hospital, and that's where I began some clinical research in bariatrics and working on sleep apnea studies. I then went to the Terrence Donnelly Center, and there I was doing a lot of mice work and working on nicotine studies. And then finally in third and fourth year, I was at St. Michael's Hospital working more on the engineering side of things and fluid mechanics. And so after undergrad, I decided that the path I wanted to take was to do a master's next. So in third and fourth year, when I started my undergrad research, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I knew that this is something that I wanted to continue in. And so I ended up doing a thesis. So I did a Master's of Applied Science under Dr. Scott Tsai. And so I work in this field called microfluidics, where I developed a cancer drug testing platform. And I'd love to share with you kind of like some of the stuff that we did. So here's a representation of a microfluidic device. So these have micron-sized channels, and they create micron-sized droplets. So if we want to put into perspective how small these things are, if you take like 4 to 8 hairs and put them to like next to each other, that's how small each of these droplets are. And within each of these droplets, we can actually encapsulate cells. And so that's what I decided to do. I decided to encapsulate breast cancer cells. And when you put a bunch of cells really close together, they want to create an aggregate, which is called a spheroid, or kind of like a mini tumor. And so one of the fun things in grad school that I decided to do is I tried to take these cool photos through a microscope. So here would be like the microfluidic device, and then just going into the actual channel. These are the micron-sized droplets. And here you'll see a single cell. So that's a single breast cancer cell within a really small droplet. And so, like I said, I was working on making a cancer drug testing platform. So let me see if this plays. Sorry. So doing the same thing, and you'll see a cell, you'll see an aggregate of breast cancer cells, kind of like a mini tumor. And so this is something I did, this is kind of everything I did in my master's. And so something I want to do after that, after we create this aggregate, is we cultured them for multiple days, and then we applied chemotherapy drugs to them. And so we can see the viability of these cell aggregates over 6 days, and then we can apply different concentrations of the drug to it. And we can see that over time, obviously the highest concentration of drug caused the lowest viability of these tumors. And so after my master's, I was still really in love with research, and I still wanted to really continue on. This is something I knew I loved. I'd been at Ryerson for a while, and this is a decision a lot of people have to make, is whether you stay kind of in the same lab that's super comfortable, that you really love, or if it's time to kind of move on to a new lab. And so I decided to apply to U of T with Dr. Melissa Radisik, and I absolutely fell in love with the research that we do here. And so what we work on is, it's called Organ on a Chip, and it's cardiac tissue engineering. And so something really cool, this is one of our platforms called BioWire. So we have like these 2 tubes on the side, and we seed cardiac tissue in the center, and we can actually see it starting to beat. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. We can start to see it beat. So these are something called cardiomyocytes. So if we break that down, cardio, heart, and then myocytes, muscle cells. So these are heart muscle cells. And so we get to see these beat. And so something else I do is still kind of this droplet microfluidic stuff. So this is a kind of a clearer video and proper experimental video of what this looks like. Something else we do is 3D printing. So here we can 3D print constructs in any shape we want. We kind of just made a heart here just for fun. And something we're working on is adding particles to this so that we can stabilize structures. So one of the major problems, kind of an engineering problem, is that when we 3D print these materials and we seed cells on top of them, what happens is that these cells begin to compact. And so as they compact, it starts to deform the structure. And so we found that if we add particles to it, this structure no longer deforms, and we can keep the shape that we initially want. And so we can apply this to obviously much more complex shapes. And so here's kind of what it looks like. So we've kind of made a beating heart, which is super fun. These are just very recent results. And so if anyone needs a Valentine's Day gift for someone, I got you. And so, yeah, so like, enough about me. I would love to lend a little bit more tips and tricks for grad school, and then what you're if you're thinking about grad school in general. So we're going to start off, most of you are undergrad researchers here, and something I want to express is that even if you're in science and undergrad, does not mean that you can't pursue an engineering grad school studies. So let's say you're an undergrad. I should put a stick person right here, like you. And then so one of your options here now is a master's. So in engineering specifically, there's 2 types of masters. You can do a course-based master's, which is an MEng, or you can do a research-based master's, which is a master's of applied science. And so from here, I love research. I did my master's. You have 2 options. You can either do what Forum is doing, and you start as a master's student and you kind of transition into being a PhD student, or you can do what I did, which is you complete the master's, and once you have the master's, you can kind of decide, is this enough for me? I'm an engineer. How ambitious do I want to be in my life? And then you can continue on to the PhD. So you have the transfer option, or you have like the complete master's and go to PhD. You also have the option just from your undergrad to get into the PhD, which is the direct PhD. And this is completely based off of your supervisor, kind of like where you see your life headed towards. And so more specifically for biomedical engineering, I want to share with you how broad biomedical engineering really is. I do like tissue engineering and more fluid mechanics, but there's definitely a lot of different fields if you're interested in. So I kind of broke it down into 3 types of engineering. So there's mechanical engineering. So here we have rehabilitation engineering, biomechanics, biofluid mechanics. So these areas maybe deal with a little bit more flow, or like I said, biomechanics, kind of how the body is moving. And then there's more like biochemistry stuff, which is biomaterials, cellular and tissue engineering, genetics engineering. And then you have like a more coding based a little bit more, which is electrical and computer engineering. So let's say medical imaging, neuroengineering, bioinformatics, and clinical engineering. So this is a very broad overview, but I thought I'd share with you guys all these options that are available. And so like like my fellow grad students have explained, picking a potential supervisor is kind of a big deal because you're with them for the next like 4 or 5 years if you're doing a PhD. And so I kind of made some questions that maybe you'd want to consider when talking to a supervisor. I think I applied to maybe like 70 labs when I was looking for my master's, and just to see what was like interesting to me. And so some of the things you can ask are like, what are some available projects? And so this is something you can look up on their website, but it's not always super up to date. So if you're able to get an interview with the prof, I would definitely recommend asking what kind of projects they have available, or what kind of project you would be working on, to see if you're interested in it yourself. What is the funding situation like? So grad school, if you don't have a scholarship, tends not to be the highest paying path you can take. And so you want to make sure that the prof has funding in order to support you, especially since we're all downtown. Another question, do you prefer your students to work independently or collaboratively? This tells you a lot about the lab, because and about yourself too. You'll realize kind of like how you like to work. So in much bigger labs, your supervisor is often less there for you. So that means that the people in your lab are very important. And especially when you need help getting trained, you want to make sure that there's other people in the lab kind of there to support you. And then how often do you normally meet with your students? This is a very big question, because like I said, if your prof is super busy, sometimes, like my prof told me in her PhD, she met with her supervisor 3 times her entire PhD, which is insane. In 5 years, she met her supervisor 3 times, 3 meetings. And each of them was because she's about to publish a paper. And so I'm very fortunate. My supervisor works very closely with our lab. So it's kind of like an open door policy. You can kind of ask her lots of questions, which has been extremely helpful. So definitely check with that. And then if you need guidance during my degree, does the lab offer support? Meaning, is my supervisor going to be there for me when I reach tough times? I think the reality of research is that you fail a lot, especially in wet bench research, and you want to make sure that you kind of have people there to support you when your experiments fail, and how to kind of proceed in those situations. And then another question is, how would you say the lab culture is? And this tells you a lot about how, like, kind of the relationship between yourself and then other people are. Something you can ask is if there's lab socials. So this is something I really like to promote in my own lab. For example, we went to the climbing gym like 2 days ago, and that's something that I really love, and I kind of initiate myself, because I think it's really important to have a close relationship with your lab. You see them every day. And so a little bit about scholarships. In biomedical engineering, you're kind of like in this middle ground between engineering, but you're also kind of doing like health research sometimes, especially for tissue engineering. So I want you to know there's available scholarships that you should definitely look into, and something I definitely did not look into early enough. I think a lot of grad students will admit. So there's internal scholarships, and then there's external scholarships. So the internal ones, you'll get emails about, for example, the department will email you saying like, you should apply to, like, here's all the list of scholarships, apply to whatever you want. The Ontario Graduate Scholarship, or OGS, is a very common one. It's called the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, but it's actually within the university. It's really great. I recommend you can even apply to that before you enter grad school. That's also something you can apply to in order to get into a lab. So if you say, I have OGS, like you write a prof, you're like, hey, I applied to OGS. And if you get it, then they're more like, you have funding. So then like it really may increase your chance of getting into that lab and really help you. And then if you do a lot of like extracurricular stuff, you can apply to like these external bigger scholarships. So like the 2 big ones are PGS/CGS. So this is like a 2-tier scholarship. You apply to PGS, and then the top applicants will get the CGS. And then if you do a lot of extracurricular stuff, you can apply for Vanier. And this one is worth $50,000 each year for 3 years. It's a great scholarship. CGS is $35,000 each year for 3 years, and PGS is $21,000 each year for 3 years. Definitely great. Definitely look into this. And so other tips I have just in general for grad school, and kind of my final little tidbit here is that so you want to three categories here. So research, you want to find a project that you enjoy, make sure there's resources available for your project. make sure that when your prof may have like this crazy idea for this project, but you need to make sure you have everything around you in order to be able to do this project. Otherwise, like you're only going to struggle a little bit more, and then it's going to take up some time. So usually this is not the case, but it's always nice to check. And then don't be scared of asking questions. It is super, super intimidating to be a new student in the lab and be like, oh my God, hi, I'm new. But like, don't be scared to ask the other graduate students like questions. Don't be scared to ask your supervisor, even if you think it's a really dumb question. Honestly, if someone's mean to you because you ask a dumb question, that's on them. You're totally entitled to ask for help, always. I made that mistake. I do not want anyone else to ever feel that mistake. The lab itself, you can ask your supervisor as you're in the interview to meet with the current students in the lab. This is super great. You'll be able to get an inside look to how the lab operates and if this is an environment that you'd really enjoy every day. Same thing with lab culture. And then life. Please make sure you have a life outside of research. I have made this mistake. I have been in my master's, like it's so easy that like you feel like you have 500 things to do that like you just dedicate your life to research. You're like, I'm super ambitious. I want to get all this done. It is so important to have space. All of the greatest ideas, inventions in this world have come from people taking a shower. Like literally when you have free space in your life, it's so important. For me, I love to do like women in engineering things. I loved, like I'm a really big advocate for like, I like to do sports. Like I have a full life outside of research and it has helped like my mental health like immensely. And so, yeah, so if you need anything at all, feel free to email me. I'm not super active on social media, but I've been trying to use Twitter more recently. And Twitter is a really great resource, actually, if you want to get into like more to see what labs are like or to see how academia is and extracurricular stuff. So yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome, Jennifer. Thank you so much. I completely agree. So many of my best ideas came from taking a shower. It's so weird, but it like totally works. So everybody, thank you so much for coming. I put the attendance form in the chat. If you have questions for the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. We can continue this conversation. I'm happy to stay here for as long as we need. But we'll see how long the panelists can stay as well, because we are a little bit over time. So I will start. So we have a question from somebody from BME, and they are scared that if they continue to pursue a PhD after their master's, they'd be underexperienced and overqualified. They've heard experiences from other engineers. What are your thoughts on this? And what is your plan to overcome? I'm guessing this question is for Jennifer. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading the rest of it. Maybe I can read it for people. So I'm in VMA as well. Big thank you to everyone that presented. However, I'm scared that if I continue to pursue a PhD after my master's, I'd be underexperienced and overqualified. I heard many horror stories from other engineers that can't find jobs afterwards because they don't have experience outside of academia. According to them, individuals with a bachelor's or master's cost less to do internships compared to hiring someone with a PhD. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think this is something a lot of people think about as they're thinking about whether they want to do a PhD. I think bluntly, as an engineer, you can go out and get a job from bachelor's for some of the disciplines, especially after a master's also. I think it depends on like what your personal goals are and also kind of like what research area you're personally in. I know a lot of the biomedical field does really appreciate someone who has a PhD. And I think a lot of the bigger companies like do like someone that has a PhD. So I think it's really dependent on the situation. I think at the end of the day, you have to kind of see like what your own personal goals are. And from there, I think everything else will work out. Yeah.
I just want to jump in to add to that. I think that was great, and especially great to see the perspective from an engineer. But I think it's the same in all kind of fields, even for people who do bio research. There are jobs for people in industry out of a bachelor's, there's jobs for people in industry out of a master's, and there's jobs for people in industry out of a PhD. They're just different, or they can be different. The titles might be different, depends on what you want out of your career and what place you see yourself in. So if you want to be a supervisor, or if you want to run your own team, then you probably need a PhD. But if you want to be doing the hands-on research every day yourself for the rest of your life, then you could maybe get a position right out of your bachelor's or your master's. So it depends what you're interested in. We have a question from Janine. What other resources did you all use to find out about different programs and supervisors?
I think I put this in the chat earlier, but I did definitely use Twitter to find out about other supervisors. Not every supervisor has Twitter, but some of them are pretty active on social media, and you can kind of see what kinds of activities they do. And sometimes they put up their publications, or they talk about their projects over there. So I would encourage you to literally just Google the supervisors and see what you find from their social media, and because I'm just saying from their like professional social media accounts. And then sometimes they have lab websites. Those are pretty helpful. They have a lot of descriptions of the different projects that they have, and also the different students that are working there. The way that I kind of went about it was I first looked up if there was a list on the department itself for recruiting supervisors, because sometimes the list of the supervisors on the programs might be outdated and a lot of them might not be recruiting. So if you can't find that list, I would encourage you to reach out to some of the administrative staff at those departments and see if they have a list for recruiting supervisors. If not, you might just have to kind of make your best guess of who's recruiting and who's not. Usually you can kind of tell if they're, if you Google their name and then Google like thesis, whatever, and you find that they have students that they have supervised before, that's a good indication that they do usually take on students. And then from there, just make a short list, reach out to the supervisors, check their lab websites, check Twitter. Sometimes they have podcast episodes. I actually found that pretty helpful. I would kind of like, especially before an interview, I would see if they had participated in podcast episodes just to kind of see what kind of person they are, and then just listen to that. And then I feel like I've kind of learned a little bit more about them from there.
Also, to quickly add on, there's also events like this where you have grad students and they'll talk about their departments. You have your TAs that might not necessarily be from one particular department. So you can also reach out to your TAs for that as well.
Great answers. I'd also say talking to, like you said, talking to your TAs, finding other grad students online and reaching out to them. Grad students are usually really happy to tell you about their labs and their work environment. And just because we didn't talk about it yet, I did my PhD in a department that had rotations, and I also found that really useful because I started grad school without having to pick my supervisor, and then I got to work for 6 weeks in 3 different labs and then pick my favorite one that I wanted to stay in for grad school. And I found that really useful because then I got to really understand everything about the lab before choosing which one to stay in for 5 to 6 years. So definitely explore whether programs have those options, because many of them do now. We have a question specifically for Forum. They were wondering how you work towards developing your computational skill set. I'm sure you have a strong foundation for the project, especially if you're not from a heavily computational background, but are developing a strong interest.
Yeah, so that was me. I literally only taken one undergraduate course in computer science, and it was Introduction to Coding, and it was Python. If you're at U of T at CSE 108, I have no shame in saying it. It was a great course. Doesn't really teach you, I think, a lot of translational stuff, if that makes sense. So I was worried that I was now interested in coding. I wanted to do a project that had dry lab aspects. I'd be working with big patient data sets, but I don't even know how to do anything but print hello. So what really helps is being straightforward. So when I started my master's, I didn't have a foundation, but because I had a supervisor that was understanding of that, like of the fact that I don't have a background in computer science or coding or any form of computational work, I was provided with like, oh, you can check this thing out on like EDX or this on Coursera, or U of T Coders has really good resources. I did a lot of tutorials, but I'm an applied learner. So I got my patient data sets, and then for a year, learned how to move from print to low to creating like survival curves and parsing through my data. And so it's really about making sure that you have the resources on hand, as in like tutorials if you need them, but then also working through something and just trying to problem solve on throughout, and having a supervisor that's understanding of your interests, of your background, but with the willingness to answer your questions.
Amazing, thank you. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. If you do have any questions, all of the panelists have shared their information of how you can contact them. You can also contact me, and always happy to answer more questions. So thank you all for